Every major faction in Star Wars history eventually built a weapon designed to destroy something that conventional warfare could not destroy. A planet, a star system, a fleet, an ideology. Some were built out of fear. Some were built out of ambition. Some were built by people who did not fully understand what they were building. Here is every superweapon, ranked from the most localized to the most galactically catastrophic. Let's break this down. The Defoliator. It killed everything alive and left everything mechanical untouched. The Defoliator was a separatist weapon system deployed during the Clone Wars whose specific destructive mechanism made it the most ideologically honest weapon in the conflict's arsenal. A device that killed organic life while leaving droids unharmed, which was the exact division the Confederacy of Independent Systems had organized its military philosophy around. A droid army fighting a clone army was a war between the manufactured and the biological, and the Defoliator was the logical extension of that division into weapons technology. A separatist force equipped with Defoliators could advance behind a curtain of fire that killed every clone trooper while preserving every battle droid. The weapon's deployment in the Clone Wars animated series demonstrated its effects on organic targets, in detail sufficient to establish its horror, clearly without explicit violence. Forest terrain hit by Defoliator rounds, igniting in a biological fire that did not touch metal. General Grievous's deployment of the weapon was stopped by Anakin Skywalker and Obi-Wan Kenobi before its full battlefield application could be realized, but the Defoliator's documented existence communicated something about the Separatist war effort that the franchise rarely stated directly. The Confederacy's military leadership was not troubled by weapons that killed people selectively based on whether they were biological. The clone troopers were people. The Separatist High Command's weapons design showed what they thought about that: the Malevolence. General Grievous's flagship was designed around two weapons whose combination was intended to be the Clone Wars' most effective fleet-killing sequence. The Malevolence was a massive warship carrying twin mega-ion cannons, directed electromagnetic pulse weapons capable of completely disabling every electronic and power system on enemy vessels within their range, including shields, weapons, engines, and life support simultaneously. A fleet hit by the Malevolence's ion pulse was a fleet of drifting, powerless hulls whose crews were alive but entirely unable to respond to what happened next. What happened next was 500 turbolaser batteries and laser cannons firing into the disabled vessels without any defensive return fire possible. The specific horror of the Malevolence as a weapons platform was the sequencing. The ion pulse created a captive target, and the subsequent bombardment addressed a target that had been made incapable of the evasion or resistance that would have made an equivalent conventional assault more costly. Plo Koon's engagement with the Malevolence in the Clone Wars established the weapon's devastating effectiveness against unprepared targets and the difficulty of surviving an encounter with it long enough to report the encounter at all. Ahsoka Tano's rescue of Plo Koon's survivors was followed by Anakin Skywalker's attack on the Malevolence, an engagement that ended with the warship's hyperdrive destroyed and the vessel ultimately crashing into a moon when its navigation system was sabotaged during Padme Amidala's brief capture aboard it. The Malachor Superweapon. The Sith built a weapon that turned everyone around it to stone, Jedi and Sith alike. The ancient superweapon housed within the Sith temple on Malachor was revealed in the Star Wars Rebels Season 2 finale as the source of the Great Scourge of Malachor, a historical catastrophe whose evidence was visible across the planet's surface in the form of petrified figures, Jedi and Sith frozen in the moment of the weapon's activation. The weapon had been built thousands of years before the events of the series by an ancient Sith alchemist whose creation had turned against both sides of the conflict it was deployed in, using massive Kyber crystals to generate an energy pulse that converted all nearby living beings into stone, regardless of their force alignment or their factional membership. The franchise used the Malachor superweapon in Rebels specifically through the activation attempt during the Season 2 finale, in which Ezra Bridger's manipulation by Darth Maul brought him close to completing the weapon's activation sequence, and in which the Eighth Brother's death on Malachor's platform Earths was one consequence of the sequence's disruption. The superweapon was ultimately destroyed before a full activation could be achieved, but the evidence of its prior use, the petrified battlefield covering Malachor's surface, communicated that its previous activation had been complete, and had ended the ancient Sith-Jedi conflict at that location through the specific mechanism of ending everyone who had been present for it simultaneously. world devastators. They ate planets and then built war machines from the material. The Legends-era world devastators were the most self-sustaining superweapons in Star Wars history, enormous automated capital ship-scale machines whose primary operational mode was the consumption of planetary surfaces, asteroids, and any other available solid material through powerful tractor beams that broke the material down and fed it into the Devastators' internal factory systems. Those factory systems then processed the consumed material into new starships, war droids, and military equipment, which the Devastator deployed as part of its operational output. The world Devastators that appeared in the Dark Empire comic series were deployed by the reborn Emperor Palpatine against Mon Calamari, a choice of target whose significance was both military and symbolic, given Mon Calamari's status as the primary shipbuilding world for the Rebel Alliance. The specific strategic horror of world Devastators was their compounding capability. Each consumed planetary mass made the Devastator more capable, and the ships they produced replenished and expanded the Imperial fleet simultaneously. Palpatine's inclusion of an emergency override code in the world Devastator's programming, a kill switch that he kept to himself specifically because he feared that even his own weapon might eventually be turned against him, was the Dark Empire's acknowledgement that a self-sustaining, self-upgrading weapon that consumed planets required a failsafe, and that the failsafe's existence revealed something about the Emperor's relationship to the things he built that he could not fully control. The Galaxy Gun. It fired through hyperspace. The Legends-era Galaxy Gun was the Dark Empire's most elegant answer to the fundamental vulnerability of every fixed-location superweapon in Star Wars history, the requirement that the weapon be brought into range of its target, which allowed potential targets to relocate, prepare defenses, or mount counter-offensives during the transit period. The Galaxy Gun was an orbital weapons platform above the reborn Emperor's throne world of Biss, whose projectiles carried their own hyperspace capability, warheads that could be fired toward a target system, enter hyperspace mid-flight, and emerge near the destination to detonate. The warheads carried particle disintegrator payloads capable of destroying planets, and their hyperspace capability meant that the distance between the Galaxy Gun and its target was irrelevant to the weapon's effectiveness. A planetary system that might have had weeks of warning before a Death Star arrived within range received none before a Galaxy Gun warhead emerged from hyperspace nearby. The weapon demonstrated its effectiveness in the Dark Empire storyline against New Republic targets before its destruction, which came not from a heroic assault on the weapon itself, but from R2-D2, who had been part of Luke Skywalker's undercover infiltration of BICE, transmitting Imperial codes that allowed a massive Imperial Superstar destroyer to crash into the Galaxy Gun. The weapon that had made conventional distance irrelevant was destroyed by a robot whose primary contribution to the fight was access to the right codes, the Starforge. It built an infinite fleet by consuming a star. The Starforge was a pre-Republic construction of the ancient Rakatan, the Infinite Empire's technological centerpiece, a massive automated factory station in orbit around a star in the Legion system that drew energy directly from the star's output to power its manufacturing processes. The manufacturing it produced was genuinely unlimited in the practical sense. As long as the star continued to burn, and as long as the raw materials required for shipbuilding were fed into its systems, the Starforge could produce starships, weapons, droids, and war material continuously without the resource constraints that limited every other manufacturing operation in the galaxy's history. The Rakata's collapse as an empire was followed by the Starforge's abandonment and eventual forgetting, buried in the star maps that scattered its coordinates across multiple systems, which Revan and Malak discovered during the events of the Knights of the Old Republic. Their use of the Starforge to build the Sith fleet that nearly conquered the Republic established the weapon's practical ceiling, an infinite fleet that was eventually defeated not because the fleet could be depleted, but because the Starforge itself was destroyed when Darth Malak was killed. The facility's destruction and the canonical ending of Knights of the Old Republic was the franchise's acknowledgement that a factory powered by a star required destroying the factory rather than its output, because the output was inexhaustible. Centerpoint Station. The ancient Celestials built it, and used it to move stars. Centerpoint Station in the Legends continuity was the superweapon whose origins connected it to the most ancient and least understood civilization in Star Wars history, the Celestials, who had constructed the station using the forced labor of their Killik servants at a point in galactic history, so far before the Republic that the Republic's own records of the period were fragmentary. What the Celestials had built was a structure larger than either Death Star, capable of generating a hyperspace tractor beam powerful enough to move planets, stars, and black holes across interstellar distances. Its construction of the Corellian and Volter systems, the placement of multiple habitable worlds in specific orbital configurations around their respective stars, was the Legends continuity's most direct statement about the Celestials' scale of operation. Beings who built star systems the way other civilizations built cities. Centerpoint's destructive application followed the same logic as its constructive one. A tractor beam capable of moving a star could destroy anything in range of the gravitational force it applied. Its destructive ceiling exceeded the Death Star's planetary destruction capability. The station could, in theory, trigger stellar destruction rather than planetary destruction. Its eventual destruction came from within. A successful sabotage mission caused it to fire inward, with Centerpoint destroyed by its own weapon, which was the Legends continuity's most consistent method of destroying things that were too powerful to be destroyed from the outside. The Sun Crusher. It was the size of a starfighter and could destroy star systems. The Legends era. Sun Crusher was the Star Wars franchise's most efficient superweapon in terms of the ratio between its physical size and its destructive capability. A vessel barely larger than an X-wing with an armored hull made of quantum-crystalline material that made it effectively indestructible by conventional weapons fire, carrying resonance torpedoes that, when fired into a star, caused the star to go supernova. The resonance torpedo's mechanism was the conversion of the target star's own nuclear processes into a feedback loop that exceeded the star's ability to contain. The weapon used the star as the actual destructive force, triggering a supernova that destroyed every planet, moon, and vessel in the star system. The Sun Crusher's practical invulnerability to attack meant that even a fleet that identified it could not destroy it before it fired. The quantum-crystalline armor resisted concentrated turbolaser fire, and the weapon's small profile made targeting difficult. Its legend story arc involved it being stolen from Imperial control by Han Solo and Chewbacca, falling into the hands of Kip Durone while he was under the influence of the spirit of Exar Kun, and being used to destroy the Coretta system before Kip partially recovered himself. Kip's subsequent destruction of the Sun Crusher, flying it into a black hole in the Maw cluster as an act of partial atonement, was the franchise's solution to a weapon too durable for conventional destruction. The only thing capable of ending it was a gravitational force whose absorption capacity exceeded even quantum-crystalline armor's resistance. The Death Star. The most famous weapon in science fiction was built to enforce an ideology. The DS-1 orbital battle station's superlaser was capable of destroying an entire planet in a single focused blast, a weapon whose development cost and operational expense were justified not through its military effectiveness as a combat tool, but through its psychological application as the centerpiece of what Grand Moff Tarkin called the Tarkin Doctrine, the proposition that the threat of planetary destruction was more effective than any conventional military deterrent because no population could sustain political resistance in the face of certain annihilation. Alderaan's destruction in A New Hope was the Tarkin Doctrine's first operational test, a planet with no defenses, no strategic military value, destroyed specifically to demonstrate what the Empire would do to planets that supported the rebellion. The Death Star's destruction at the Battle of Yavin established the franchise's central thesis about the Tarkin Doctrine's flaw. A weapon whose psychological impact depended on its invulnerability was a weapon fundamentally vulnerable to the moment its invulnerability was demonstrated to be false. The second Death Star's incomplete state during the Battle of Endor and the simultaneous trap prepared for the Rebel fleet were Palpatine's attempt to address this vulnerability by making the second Death Star both a weapons platform and bait, the weapon as the instrument of its own enemy's destruction. It failed because Vader's redemption removed the chain of command that the trap depended on functioning correctly at its conclusion. Starkiller Base. The First Order took a planet that was sacred to the Jedi, hollowed it out, and built the most destructive weapon in canon Star Wars history inside it. Ilum had been the Jedi Order's primary source of Kyber crystals, the planet where Jedi initiates traveled to find the crystals that would power their lightsabers, whose ice caves had been sacred ground for the Order for millennia. The Empire began mining it after Order 66 for the Kyber crystals needed in Death Star construction. The First Order finished the conversion that the Empire had begun, excavating the planet's interior sufficiently to house a collection system capable of draining an entire star's worth of energy into a containment core at the planet's center. The weapon that used this energy fired through hyperspace, not requiring line of sight to its target, able to destroy multiple planets in a single discharge across galactic distances. Its first use destroyed the Hosnian system, which included Hosnian Prime and the New Republic Senate simultaneously, eliminating the new galactic government in a single shot that was visible to observers on Takodana with the naked eye. Starkiller Base exceeded the Death Star in every measurable dimension of destructive capability. Larger, drawing from stellar energy rather than internal power generation, capable of multi-target engagement, and able to strike across hyperspace rather than requiring proximity. Its destruction came from the same narrative logic that had ended the Death Star: a vulnerability in its power containment, a small team that reached the critical point, and the weapon's own stored energy detonating when the oscillator was destroyed.